It's been weird seeing Daniel Ricciardo's fall from grace since he was easily one of the fastest drivers on the grid. And while he's been attributing his bad form to the car, a McLaren insider revealed that the claim isn't true at all. So what's up with Aussie's pace, and does this jeopardize his F1 career? Let's dive right in and discuss. First up, Daniel Ricciardo's lack of pace is puzzling. Alright, we all know how bad the past couple of years have been for Ricciardo, as he's been a shadow of his former self. You could have blamed his lack of pace on the car during Renault days, as he was still at least trading blows with his teammate. Since his switch to McLaren though, it's all been going downhill, and there doesn't seem to be any reasonable explanation for that. Like, when you look at Lando Norris in the other papaya orange seat, the car actually starts to look pretty competitive. In fact, the British drivers outpaced the Honey Badger in most races so far, and apart from a brief flash of brilliance at Monza last year, Ricciardo's been nothing but horrendous for the team. Of course, there's always a margin of error when it comes to drivers' standings, but being 11th after 7 races is just not good enough for a team like McLaren. Oh, and it's not like they don't know. Even team boss Zak Brown's been expressing his frustrations with the Aussie, saying that he needs to get his act together as soon as possible. Plus, when it comes to narrowing down what's wrong with Ricciardo's pace, even he doesn't quite understand it yet. After finishing 12th in Catalunya, he said that he almost wished there was something wrong with his car, so at least there would be some explanation for his poor performance. Now, these sound like the words of a super demoralized driver, and honestly, we don't blame him. After all, it can be pretty hard to accept the fact that you can't even score a point in a car that should be raking them in every single week. So, what's wrong with Daniel Ricciardo? Is he unhappy with the car, or is there something deeper at play here? And now, McLaren director explains Ricciardo's car differences for this season. Of course, whenever a driver doesn't perform as he should, the first line of defense is usually blaming it on the car. And to be fair to them, it's true 9 out of 10 times as well, since Formula 1 cars can be complicated beasts that aren't the easiest things to tame. Besides, if you've got a really edgy car like the old Red Bulls, getting to grips with it can sometimes be almost impossible for a new driver. We've seen it with Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon, both of whom failed to perform in the Red Bull seat but went on to drive really well for other teams. With that said, if you're actually an elite driver who's aiming to win a championship, you've got to be able to adapt to these situations ASAP. Ricciardo's situation, though, is neither here nor there. We know that he's got pace in him, as we've seen him dominate races in the past. Plus, last year's McLaren wasn't the greatest car in the world either, because, well, nailing its setup was half the battle. However, when they did sometimes get things right, it resulted in incredible results, like the one at Monza. Also, Lando's pace last year shouldn't be really compared to the Aussie, as he'd been in the team longer, so he's probably more accustomed to the car. Having said that, things are very different for this year. According to McLaren's technical director James Key, they've designed this new car to specifically suit Ricciardo's driving style. So it no longer has an unstable rear end, and neither does it have the same brake issues as it did last year. In fact, Key's went as far as to say that Daniel's actually super comfortable in this new car and rarely ever complains about it. Apparently, last year's car was a bit too quote-unquote peaky for the Honey Badger's liking, but this year it's a lot more consistent through corners and is definitely easier to drive. Speaking to the Beyond the Grid podcast, the McLaren director also went into detail on what's changed about the Australian's driving style. According to him, the 32-year-old's now a much more mature driver. Now, you'd think that being mature comes with losing that competitive edge and ambition. Keys, however, believes that Ricciardo's still as pumped as ever, but he's also more comfortable in his skin and doesn't have to prove anything anymore. So, is Ricciardo's McLaren career in danger? Now, saying that Daniel Ricciardo doesn't have to prove anything to anyone is greatness and everything, but we all know that's not true. Yes, there was a time when people said that he's definitely going to win an F1 championship at some point, but now, at the age of 32, it's kind of slipping away for the Aussie. On top of that, he seems to have completely lost his mojo and can't even compete with his young teammate anymore. So, there's definitely a ton of pressure on Danny Ric's shoulders. Of course, that doesn't mean that he's suddenly forgotten how to drive. After all, we did see last year that he's still capable of pulling those great performances out of the bag every now and then. It's just a question of being consistent enough to score crucial points for your team. And to be honest, if he's the reason behind McLaren slipping down the pecking order, then there's every chance that he's kicked out of the team. We've already heard comments from the team boss Zak Brown, who said that Ricciardo's stint at McLaren's been super disappointing. The real damning thing for the Aussie, however, was Brown's reluctance to commit to the driver. In fact, the McLaren CEO even implied that the 32-year-old's contract with the team comes with a clause that allows them to offload him if he doesn't meet performance goals. Obviously, it's bizarre to think that a high-profile driver like Ricciardo could be kicked out of a team for not producing results, but that's just the harsh reality now. And if the Honey Badger doesn't go back to his dive-bombing ways soon, he could very well be on his way out of the sport entirely. Next, in other related news, F1 confirms new approach to pit lane lines. This year's Monaco Grand Prix was pretty controversial for a lot of reasons. Ferrari's strategic meltdown, Albon holding up Leclerc, and Mick Schumacher's massive crash, the race at Monte Carlo had it all. The most interesting story of the weekend, though, wasn't related to an overtake or crash. Instead, it was a weird rule in the race director's notes. You see, when Max Verstappen crossed the white line on pit lane exit, many people thought that he'd be getting a stonewall penalty. However, Red Bull somehow got away with it due to the finest of margins. Heading into Baku, though, the FIA is making sure there's no room for ambiguity in the rulebook again. So for this weekend, they've allowed the drivers to go across the pit lane exit lines as long as the full tire doesn't go beyond it. Now, this seems like a fair solution to a complicated problem, but we're sure someone's still going to find a way to exploit it. And now, Steiner warns Mick Schumacher about future crashes. Being the son of Michael Schumacher probably comes with a ton of pressure, and while no one expected Mick to start winning races out of nowhere, the truth is that he hasn't even matched his teammate Magnussen so far this season. The real problem isn't the pace, though, as Haas rarely ever finds itself in the points. It's the fact that Mick Schumacher's been crashing into barriers like there's no tomorrow. Seriously, it's almost like the kid's got a magnet that pulls him towards these things, and as a result, he's been wrecking the car a lot. Now, we know that Haas isn't the richest team on the grid, and they kinda struggle to keep things going in F1, so building a new car every other weekend for Mick isn't ideal for them. In fact, according to Haas boss Gunther Steiner, they've already passed their damage allowance for this season, and apparently he's also given a stern lecture to the young driver, saying that he needs to keep the car intact for future races, as they could even run out of parts if things continue to unfold like this. Finally, Gasly considering other options after Perez's new Red Bull deal. Pierre Gasly has had a pretty weird career trajectory in F1. The jump to Red Bull a couple of years ago was supposed to be his big break, but after failing to keep up with his teammate Max Verstappen, the team demoted the Frenchman back down to Toro Rosso. Ever since his demotion, though, Gasly's been on fire, consistently outpacing his teammate and even scoring a podium and a win. Now, since he's still technically a Red Bull driver, the only straight path to a top team was always going to be a return to Christian Horner's team alongside Max. Sergio Perez's new Red Bull contract, however, has thrown a spanner in the works, as there's no seat left for the 26-year-old anymore. According to Gasly, though, he's now talking to the Red Bull boss Helmut Marko to find other solutions and perhaps check out other top teams. Of course, it's not like there's any space for him in any of the other teams on the grid either, but it would be interesting to see where he eventually decides to land after this season. That's all, folks. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.